State's Exhibit 22. What is this?
It was a manila type folder that had documents related to Mr. Federico.
And what is it titled in front?
Federico case.
Okay. State's Exhibit 26. What do we see there?
Another file that entitled Judge Screw-Ups.
Our next witness will be Peter Marwytz.
Stand, raise your right hand, please, support.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Peter Marwytz, Marwytz.
Please state your first name and spell.
Peter, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a City of Las Vegas Municipal Court Marshal.
Okay. And so, what is being a City of Las Vegas Municipal Court Marshal?
We do security in the courthouse for the municipal court, including and also serving warrants and doing investigations.
Okay. And you're employed by the City of Las Vegas
Yes, sir.
underneath their Department of Public Safety,
We're separate from them.
Okay.
The municipal court.
specifically for the court system.
Yes, sir.
And so are you a law enforcement officer?
Yes, sir, since 2005.
Okay. So you're a law enforcement officer that specifically works for the Las Vegas Municipal Court.
Yes, sir.
Is one of your duties providing security for judges,
Yes, sir.
investigating threats against judges?
Yes, sir.
And how long have you been doing this job?
Since 2005, peace officer. I've been a marshal since 2007.
Okay. And are you familiar with Kim Blandino?
Yes, sir.
You see Kim Blandino here in the courtroom today.
I do.
If you could please identify him and identify a piece of
We'll
clothing.
stipulate that every defendant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, did you become involved in an investigation of the defendant in 2019 involving Municipal Judge Pro Tem Michael Federico?
Yes, sir.
At that time, what was your job?
At that time, I was assigned to a task force.
And where was that task force?
That task force was here in town. It was with the FBI. It included multiple agencies, including Metro, Henderson, our department, and several others, sir.
What is a task force?
So that task force was to investigate either criminal or CT, counterterrorism, or anything that was criminal, including anything threats against public officials.
Okay. And so this included the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department,
Yes, sir.
the Henderson Police Department,
Yes, sir.
the Federal Bureau of Investigation,
Yes, sir.
any other federal agencies?
The Federal Air Marshals, there was Air Force involved as well.
Okay. Other law enforcement agencies also involved in this task force?
Yes, sir.
And so a task force, tell me if I'm wrong here, is that essentially you're working in a unit with law enforcement officers from various different agencies, but you guys are all working together full-time as one team?
Correct.
Okay. So when you were working in this task force, was your partner another city municipal court marshal?
No, sir. He's a detective with Metro, Las Vegas Metro Police Department.
And that's because you guys work together on the task force?
Correct.
And that was your full-time job?
Yes, sir.
And so when this case came up with Mr. Blandino in reference to Judge Pro Tem Michael Federico, this was something that your task force was assigned to investigate?
Yes, sir.
Did this ultimately bring you to a point on April 29th, 2019, where you were at Mr. Federico's private law office at 9950 West Cheyenne?
Yes, sir.
And were you there with your partner at the time?
Yes, sir.
And that was the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department detective?
Yes, sir.
that Kenneth Mead?
That's correct.
And did you meet with Mr. Federico there at his office?
We did.
During that time that you're meeting with Mr. Federico, did you and your partner propose that he call Mr. Blandino?
Yes, Mr. Federico was very concerned that Mr. Blandino was going to come back to his office with the second visit, so he's afraid that Blandino would come back either to his house or back to the office again.
Okay. And now, did Mr. Federico in fact agree to call Mr. Blandino?
Yes, sir.
And did he in fact do that with you and Detective Mead there?
Yes, sir.
And was the number that he used to call Mr. Blandino the same one that Mr. Blandino had provided on several documents?
That's correct.
Now, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury about that call and what occurred that day?
Yeah, so the call started when Blandino answered the phone. He was shocked that Federico reached out to him. Blandino said he was an investigative journalist with the Nevada Commission of Judicial Discipline. Blandino stated he wished the statute of limitations for the judicial conduct was over a year. Mr. Blandino went on to say that it's his practice to settle, if he's got an issue with somebody, to settle with them man-to-man or one-on-one before he has to move it up to another level.
What was Mr. Blandino's demeanor at the start of this call?
He was upset because he was just prior removed from the courthouse, from Federico's courtroom.
When you say upset, like, what do you mean?
He was told to leave, so he didn't think that was a problem.
Oh, Mr. Blandino's demeanor on the phone?
At the beginning, yes.
Okay. Did he sound excited at all?
At times through the call, yes,
Okay. Did he talk much during the
a
call?
lot.
Did he say anything about being surprised that?
He was shocked, yeah.
No, these questions are leading.
I'm sorry,
These are leading questions. I mean,
sustained, you are aiding.
Okay. What do you mean about his demeanor? Tell me more about that.
At the beginning of the call, and when Mr. Blandino answered the phone, he was surprised. He was surprised that Federico reached out to him.
How so?
Because these,
No, what was it about Mr. Blandino's, what he said and his demeanor on the call which led you to surmise that?
just the way he was talking, like, it was, that he's done this before, is what Mr. Blandino's done, what he said,
Okay,
and this is the first time that someone reached out to him.
okay. And now, had you and your partner discussed with Mr. Federico specific things that you were going to offer Mr. Blandino?
No, sir.
Was that at all something that you guys were doing?
No, it was the nature of the call was just to see what Mr. Blandino meant by settlement.
Okay. And so, the nature of the call being that, what was it that you discussed with Mr. Federico about what, if anything, he should say to Mr. Blandino?
Yeah, not to offer anything, not to, just to find out what it meant by Mr. Blandino, what he put in those two letters about the settlements.
Okay. At some point in the call, did Mr. Federico say, do you want me to remove the contempt time?
He did.
Okay, was that something that you or your partner indicated that he should say?
No, sir.
Okay.
No.
Nonetheless, did Mr. Blandino respond that that wasn't what he wanted?
He did, so when Mr. Federico said, hey, just remove the contempt time work, Mr. Blandino said, no, because that's gonna cause some kind of civil procedure problems with Mr. Federico, so.
Did Mr. Blandino offer to Mr. Federico what he believed would be something that he wanted at minimum.
Yes, at minimum, Mr. Blandino said, I want an apology in an open forum.
Okay. And did he indicate what that apology that he wanted was for?
That was for the traffic trial, plus the having on the 25th when Federico was told him to leave his courtroom.
The August,
August 28th, I believe, is the trial.
okay, as well as the April 25th, 2019 event?
Yes,
And that's what Mr. Blandino said?
yes.
Did Mr. Blandino say anything about how, when, or where he wanted to communicate, or whether he did want to communicate with Mr. Federico?
He did, so Mr. Blandino wanted to meet in person with Mr. Federico. He did state that if he didn't, he was going to go ahead and file those judicial complaints. But they ultimately used email as the best way to do it, so they exchanged emails at the end.
Okay, and so at the end of the call, both Mr. Blandino and Mr. Federico exchanged emails?
Correct.
So at the gist of it, the prompts that you wanted, and you and your partner told Mr. Federico to provide to Mr. Blandino were open-ended questions?
Correct.
Just like, what do you want?
Correct.
And by this time, on April 29th, 2019, you were now involved in this investigation.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right?
Yes.
And were you aware of the other two letters, or the two letters that had been dropped off at
We
Mr.
were.
Federico's office?
We were, yes, sir.
And had you reviewed those letters?
We did.
And at that point in time, when this call was placed, were you aware that Mr. Blandino was reaching out to Mr. Federico, seeking contact to quote-unquote negotiate?
Yes, sir.
We'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Tom?
Yes. Good afternoon. What's your title? I'm sorry, is it officer? Is it marshal?
Marshal, sir.
Marshal Marwytz? Okay. Okay, so, on April 29th, you were present for that phone call, and that, phone call was not recorded or transcribed, is that correct?
That's correct.
And, as, you were, so on that phone call, you testified previously, you were aware of the letters that had been dropped off and sort of the history that led to that point. Did you take notes of that phone call?
I did. Of the interview? Or
Of
the phone call?
the phone call.
I did, sir.
Okay. And, so, what, from those notes, what do you recall about that? I mean, you stated previously Mr. Blandino said no when Mr. Federico asked him if he wants to remove the contempt sign.
Yep.
But he said no, because that would be improper, or what your words were.
It was criminal, the way the plaintiff said it was something to do with civil procedures that would affect Mr. Federico.
All right. And did you write down to Mr. Federico the words that he should say?
We did not.
Did you give him questions to ask?
We wanted open-ended questions.
Okay. Did you give him or suggest to him any of those questions? You personally?
No.
Okay. Did you see Detective Mead? Is that your partner's name?
Correct.
Okay, did Detective Mead, did you notice him write down any questions for Mr. Federico to ask?
I don't know about questions, more like to keep it open-ended. I'd have to ask him.
Okay. Did you review your notes prior to your testimony today?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall any of those questions that?
Questions.
Yeah, the questions that, any of those open-ended questions?
That, no, we didn't give him questions to Federico, we just wanted to know what the settlement was. So we didn't want him, we just wanted to figure out what he meant by the settlement or settle.
All right. And you testified that Mr. Blandino wanted to meet in person.
Correct.
Would you say he was fairly insistent on, hey, I just want to meet with you?
No, because
Because I know this has been a long time. It's been over 2 years for this phone call, but.
that was the second time showing up at Federico's office, and he was very concerned with him coming to his house or back there.
And, but you wanted, I mean, you specifically, and you and your partner wanted something in writing, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is that to be able to incriminate him?
No, we didn't want to meet in person, we didn't want that.
Okay. But you wanted something in writing to have it, to hold against him? Why did you want something in writing?
To see what he wanted meant by settlement.
But I mean, he could have just articulated that over the phone
No.
or in a meeting.
No, because Mr. Blandino said he needed time to think about it, and we'll get back to him.
Okay. And if you recall, Mr. Blandino, I understand Mr. Federico, sorry, let me back up. I understand Mr. Federico did not want to meet with him, was hesitant, but did any time Mr. Blandino say, look, you can have your attorney present or other people present?
During that call?
Yes.
Not that I recall.
Not that you remember? Okay. And so, Mr. Blandino, after this call, subsequently sends an email to Mr. Federico, sort of giving his list of things that he wants, correct?
Yes.
And would you characterize that call that Mr. Federico led him to believe that he would negotiate with Mr. Blandino?
Negotiate as far as the settlement?
Yes.
I don't know.
Like, okay, like, send me what you want, and I'll get back to you and we'll discuss it.
Or to talk about it?
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
That's not that I know, sir.
All right. And, in fact, you didn't have, with that first, that letter that was sent, I believe it was May 2nd, and even then the follow-up, May 3rd, you didn't have enough evidence to arrest him after those emails were sent, did you?
On those,
Yes.
we went ahead and collected that and continued our investigation.
Okay. But you asked for more evidence, you asked for you or your partner told Mr. Federico, ask for more, ask for a global settlement, correct?
I believe that was in one of the emails, yes, sir.
Okay. And the reason you did that is because you had insufficient evidence to arrest him at that point, correct?
Calls for an improper legal conclusion, Your Honor.
Yeah, why don't you rephrase the question?
Okay. After the email was sent on May 2nd and May 3rd, why didn't you arrest Mr. Blandino?
We were still investigating at that time.
What did you lack in your investigation?
Continue on, nothing but,
Is it fair to say that when you did have enough evidence against Mr. Blandino, you arrested him?
we submitted through the DA, yes.
Okay, sorry, yes, so not you personally arrested him, yes, so, sorry, maybe I might explain that to our jurors, how that works. You or like an affidavit for
Correct.
arrest. Why don't you explain that, sorry?
So,
Because our jurors, you and I are in this sort of process, then they might not understand that.
after some time, we went ahead and filed an affidavit with a DA approval, and we go ahead and get that signed by a judge for a warrant for his arrest for the charges.
Okay. So in that you sort of list your cause, the judge reviews it
Correct.
and determines if there is
Enough there.
what they call probable cause to justify that. Okay. And so when you did that, once you felt you had enough, what day was that? You recall?
I do not.
Okay. Was it after, May 9th?
I do remember he was arrested on the 21st,
Okay.
so it must have been between those two.
Okay. And so, I mean, now again, I know that, Mr. Blandino initiated this, in this contact, but, you and your partner, through Mr. Federico, sort of changed the way you interacted with Mr. Blandino, and meaning, by asking for writing, he wanted just a meeting in person, and you wanted him to give you something in writing. Is that correct?
Preferably, yes. Mr. Federico did not want to meet Mr. Blandino.
Understood. And so again, just to clarify, you did not tell Mr. Federico what to say on that call?
We told him to not to keep the questions open, or just to find out what he wanted with the settlement.
But no specific open questions for him to ask?
No, I thought I recall.
I have no questions.
Can you redirect?
Yeah, just briefly. Marshal, that, you'd indicated that call was not recorded, right?
That call was not recorded, correct?
You did not have a wiretap warrant authorized by a judge to record that call, right?
We did not.
Which would have been required by law.
Yes.
I'm gonna just show you here, case exhibits 33 and 34. This is not your handwriting, is it?
It is not.
Okay. State of past witness.
Any recross? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony here today. You may step down and you're excused from your subpoena. Do you have a quick witness?
I don't, I think he'll go longer than 10 minutes.
Okay, all right.
It's the detective.
Okay. Can I have the attorney just to protocol on hold?
Yes, sir. Thanks, Robert.
All right, at this time, we are going to conclude for the evening. During this recess, you're not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case or its merits, either by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or other means of communication, or social media, or read, watch, or listen to any news or media accounts, or commentary about the case, do any research, such as consulting dictionaries, using the internet, or using reference materials, making the investigation, test a theory of the case, recreating the aspects of the case, or in any other way investigate or learn about the case on your own, or form or express any opinion regarding the case until it's finally submitted to you. We'll be in recess till tomorrow afternoon at 1:30. Same thing, you'll come up to the 14th floor. Officer Hawks will greet you and bring you in when we're ready. Thank you very much for your courtesy today and your patience, and you are excused.
Thank you, all right, your next speaker is adjourned.
1:30.
All right. Adjourned.
Yeah, 1:30.
Department 12 is now in session, Honorable Michelle Leavitt presiding. Come to order and be seated, please.
We can bring the camera in.
All right, for entering jury, please. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated.
Does the state stipulate to the presence of the panel
We do, Your Honor.
and the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please state and call their next witness.
State's next witness will be Kenneth Mead.
And if you will please remain standing, raise your right hand, face the court.
You do solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Kenneth Mead, Kenneth, last name Mead.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Thank you. What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a detective with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
And how long have you been employed with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department?
For 24 years.
In that entire period as a law enforcement officer?
Yes, sir.
And what is your current assignment generally as a detective? What area of crime do you investigate?
So we investigate matters related to threats against law enforcement, threats against government officials, threats against judicial officials, one of our primary responsibilities.
Among other things?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the events that bring you here to testify today occurred on or about 2019, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
At that time, what was your assignment?
I was in my current assignment. I was a detective assigned to the Southern Nevada Fusion Center,
Okay,
as well as federal task force.
okay. And the federal task force that you're assigned to, you're currently assigned to that as well?
Yes, sir.
And were you assigned to that same task force in 2019, you indicated?
Yes, sir.
How long have you been assigned to that task force?
I've been co-assigned to the federal task force for about 10 years now as well.
Okay. So, do you have a special designation as being part of that task force?
I do.
What is that?
I'm a task force officer with the FBI.
And what does that mean?
I'm deputized as a federal agent to investigate federal crime as well, state and federal crime. And that could be anything from, any federal statutes, 18 U.S.C. 242, terrorism offenses, weapons offenses.
Okay.
Generally any federal crime.
And what sort of training and experience do you have at this point in time as a law enforcement officer?
In my cumulative career.
Yeah, in your cumulative career and your positions that you hold now.
So I have a bachelor's degree in abnormal psychology. I have a master's degree in criminal justice. I have my postgraduate certifications in forensic psychology. I'm currently working on a PhD right now in either general psychology or criminal justice. I have over 3,000 hours of training with both the FBI and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in matters related to criminal justice.
So, are you familiar with Kim Blandino?
Yes, sir.
And do you see Mr. Blandino here in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir.
If you could please point to him, identify a piece of clothing that he's wearing.
Gentleman with looks like a navy blue suit and a maroon ascot.
Okay, if the record reflect the identification of Mr. Blandino.
So reflected.
Thank you. And you're familiar with the investigation which brings you here to testify today?
Yes, sir.
How was it that you became involved in this investigation?
So I was notified probably, I'd say maybe April 22nd-ish, kind of 21st, 22nd. I don't remember how I was actually notified that a crime report was filed for extortion from a municipal court judge, Federico, with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. So I ended up pulling up the police report to see what the crime report read and the voluntary statement, and then coordinated efforts with my partner, Officer Peter Marwytz, who is a Las Vegas City Marshal at the time.
Okay. So this crime report that you became aware of, this was filed at an area command of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department?
Yes, sir.
What's an area command?
That's a substation, essentially, the area police station. It's broken down into 10 different districts in the valley. So each particular part of town has an area command that's responsible for servicing calls for service in that area.
And this one was filed on April 9th, 2019 by Mr. Federico at the Northwest Area Command?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. That particular area command is right next to his office at 9950 West Cheyenne.
That would be the closest one, yes.
Now, you're in a specialized unit that's outside of an area command, it's specifically outside of Northwest Area Command, is that right?
Yes, sir. So I work out of Metro headquarters as well as the FBI office.
Okay. So can you just describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the general process that this sort of crime report would take and how it came to your desk?
So generally speaking, a crime report is filed by a citizen. It's reviewed by an area command sergeant or supervisor, either in the field or if it's done at the station, it's reviewed by a supervisor. Then it's put into a queue, and a system we call P1, which is our kind of a records case management system. Then generally I get assigned to a detective, depending on what the crime is. So if it's a robbery-related offense, I'll get assigned to a robbery detective. If it's a homicide, obviously a homicide. There are what we call patrol detectives assigned to each area command that handle crimes, burglaries and things at the area command level. But if it's something that maybe the area command feels is not at the ability of the detectives at the station level, or maybe a crime that's not as commonly investigated, it may get sent to a specialized unit for investigation.
And that's what happened here.
Yes, sir.
So at the time that you became aware of this investigation, you became aware of a note that was dropped off by Mr. Blandino at Mr. Federico's office on April 8th, 2019, is that right?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you here Grand Jury Exhibit 3. Looking at the screen. Is this that note?
Yes, sir.
Just for clarification here, because we do have the original in evidence, up here in the top right-hand corner of this document, do you know what that is?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
That's Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department event number. So the way the event numbers are managed, it's the year. So 2019, 04 would be the month, and then a sequential number based on what report, if it's, the 41,871st report. It designates the time that the report was taken.
Okay, so this event number here was placed onto the document itself, or the copy of the document itself by law enforcement.
Yes, sir, and the reason why that is done is that all the documents and paperwork related to that particular event number or this case file will all get put into the same system, so everything stays together as one case, and we can pull it up as detectives based on that report number.
Okay, so this is just a way that you can have a single case number to track everything in a particular investigation.
So a records management system, yes, sir.
Okay. So following your becoming aware of this case, did you become aware of some events that transpired on April 25th, 2019?
Yes.
Including Mr. Blandino coming to the courtroom of Mr. Federico?
I wasn't made aware of that, yes.
And then you were made aware of that?
Yes, sir.
And then subsequently arriving at Mr. Federico's office and dropping off a second letter at his office?
Yes.
After that point in time, were there additional steps that were taken by you and your team with Mr. Federico to further this investigation?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe what happened at that point in time?
So at that point, we felt that there were two incidents where Mr. Blandino was showing up at the law office and showing up at the courtroom. We felt that it was escalating slightly, so we needed to try to take some investigative steps to figure out if we could validate the crime report that was filed. Myself and Officer Marwytz elected to proceed to Mr. Federico's office in an attempt to make a phone call to Mr. Blandino, and that took place on April 29th.
Okay. And I'm going to show you here State's Exhibit 4. Was this the letter of April 25th, 2019 that you became aware of?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So at this point in time in your investigation, you were aware, here looking at State's Exhibit 3, the April 8th, 2019 letter, is that right?
April 9th, or April 8th.
April 8th, 2019 note, I should
Yes, sir.
say. And in that note, you were aware of the language that indicates Mr. Blandino was seeking to have Michael Federico in his capacity as a pro tem judge negotiate with him, so in relation to Mr. Blandino being ready to file complaints against Mr. Federico.
Yes, sir.
And then subsequently, the April 25th, 2019 letter that was dropped off by Mr. Blandino at the office where he indicates further, in more aggressive terms, what he's seeking, but without specificity.
Yes, sir.
Further indicating that he's ready to file complaints with the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline against Mr. Federico.
That was my take, yes.
And further in this document, identifying himself as an unpaid volunteer investigator for the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline.
Yes, sir.
So at that point in time, we go to April 29th, 2019. You and your partner, Marshal Marwytz, arrive up at Mr. Federico's office at 9950 West Cheyenne.
Yes, sir.
You have a discussion with Mr. Federico?
We did.
And what did that discussion consist of?
So we wanted Mr. Federico to make the phone call to Mr. Blandino. There were several reasons for that. One, in the documents that were produced by Mr. Blandino, he made several references to wanting to negotiate some sort of settlement. And so we were trying to, one, with the phone call, gauge Mr. Blandino's level of cooperation with Mr. Federico. We wanted to get some clarification as far as what Mr. Blandino viewed as a settlement. One, to establish potential elements of a crime. But we also had very direct conversations with Mr. Federico that we did not want him to lead the conversation. We did not want him to suggest anything. We just wanted the conversation to go where it went between Mr. Federico and Mr. Blandino.
Okay. And so the gist of your conversation with Mr. Federico was, are you willing to call Mr. Blandino?
Yes.
And if you do, we want you just to generally ask him, what do you want?
Yes, and we specifically asked him, do not make any specific statements asking for anything. We just, again, wanted the conversation to go where it went, and then we would let the investigation proceed based on that initial phone conversation.
Okay. And so Mr. Federico agrees to call Mr. Blandino,
Yes, sir.
and he calls him at the number that Mr. Blandino had left on these various letters.
He did.
Then, does Mr. Blandino pick up the phone?
He does.
And can you tell, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, just how that conversation proceeded?
So in summation, generally, my impression was that Mr. Blandino was surprised that Mr. Federico had reached out to him. So it kind of caught him off guard, was my take on it. Mr. Blandino and him had conversations regarding matters related to the statute of limitations and specific NRS related to removing judges from their positions, censures, just a general conversation about what that might look like and the interactions that occurred on April 25th specifically.
Do you recall Mr. Federico saying something to the effect of, to Mr. Blandino, what would it take to get you out of my hair?
Yes.
And at some point in time, did Mr. Federico ask Mr. Blandino, well, what do you want? You want me to take away the contempt time, the jail time that I put
I
over
do
you?
remember him asking that, yes.
And do you remember Mr. Blandino's response?
Yes, Mr. Blandino responded that he did not want Judge Federico to do that. He felt that that would place Mr. Federico in a position where he would have some issues with appeal or some civil rules, courtroom decorum type issues.
Okay. And did Mr. Blandino during that call indicate that he, anything in particular that he wanted?
Yes, and at the very end of the conversation, he mentioned that at a minimum, he was looking for an apology in an open forum. My impression was in an open court type setting. And then, again, Mr. Blandino reiterated the fact that he was caught off guard and that he would need more time to think about specifics of a settlement between the two. Both parties exchanged emails and we confirmed that everybody had each other's contact information and the call ended.
Okay. Am I correct that call lasted approximately 20 minutes?
I believe so, yes.
Who did the majority of talking?
Mr. Blandino, I believe.
Okay. During that call, did you or Marshal Marwytz provide Mr. Federico some prompts or some questions on a note to ask Mr. Blandino?
I did, yes.
Okay, I'm going to show you here grand jury exhibits 33 and 34. Do you recognize these?
Yes, sir, those are notes that I was taking and passing to Mr. Federico. That is my handwriting.
Okay. I'm showing, looking at 33 here on the left. Can you just read those?
Number one, what are your terms of settlement? Number two, what do you want to see happen?
Okay. Now looking to 34 on the right. Can you read those?
I'm an attorney. I'm not going to go blind into negotiations trying to get clarification prior to meeting. Ask what happens if I don't agree to meet.
So, was Mr. Blandino trying to meet with Mr. Federico?
Yeah, during the phone call, my impression was that Mr. Blandino preferred an in-person meeting with Federico to discuss the terms of the settlement.
Was that something that you, as the investigators in this case, were going to try to do?
No,
And why is that?
I felt it was too risky a scenario. There were too many variables for me to control for safety concerns. It's just something that I was not comfortable doing.
Okay.
I was much more comfortable having them do this over email. That way there was essentially a paper trail for the communications between the two of them.
And was further communication via email discussed between Mr. Federico and Mr. Blandino?
Yes.
And how did that ultimately end with the conversation?
I believe Mr. Blandino said I can email you the terms of my settlement at a later date.
Okay. Mr. Blandino indicating that he wanted time to think about what he wanted?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that call ends, and then what happens?
So that was April 29th. I mean, we continued our investigation. There was some email exchanges between the two of them that I was aware of on May 2nd and May 9th, I believe.
Okay.
And ultimately, we felt that we could proceed with our investigation on a potential extortion charge.
Okay. So I'm going to show you here the State's Exhibit 5. Here we have the email from May 2nd, 2019 from Kim Blandino to Michael Federico entitled Draft of Settlement Agreement. You recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And then I'm turning the page to the attachment. You recognize what this is?
Yes, sir.
Is this that agreement that Mr. Blandino had sent over to Mr. Federico?
Yes, sir.
In that particular agreement, you received that and reviewed it?
I did receive it within the day of part of the email coming in.
Okay. As well as an email the next day that I'm showing you here, State's Exhibit 6, where there's an attachment, that same document, but with exhibits sent by Mr. Blandino to Mr. Federico.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you reviewed that as well?
I did.
At that point in time, did it become clear that Mr. Blandino was asking for specific things from Mr. Federico?
Yes, there was far more clarity than on the settlement terms from the phone call to the progressive email that was received by Mr. Federico.
And specifically saying that he wanted these things in exchange for not filing complaints with the Commission on Judicial Discipline.
Yes, sir.
And from that point in time, there was a follow-up email on May 9th, 2019. Is that right, by Mr. Federico?
Yes.
I'm going to show you here that State's Exhibit 7. Do you recognize this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is the May 9th email, sorry, this is the May 9th email down here from Mr. Federico to Mr. Blandino, indicating, please provide a new proposed global agreement that would cover anything in the past, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And was that sent in large part because there was a realization from the first document that Mr. Blandino had provided on the second and third that he was leaving out some of the things he had grieved about in August of 2018?
That's my impression of it, but again, that would be something that Mr. Federico would probably have to discuss.
Okay, you don't recall your conversations or having conversations with Mr. Federico about this email?
About this May 9th email, no.
Okay, and you don't know whether Marshal Marwytz did?
I don't know.
Okay. And now, ultimately, Mr. Blandino responds to Mr. Federico.
Yes, sir.
In about an hour and 28 minutes, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you were aware of this?
Yes, sir.
And then you're aware of the attachment that Mr. Blandino sent that day.
Yes, sir.
The letter of May 9th, 2019, that's dated at the top, May 8th, 2019.
Yes, sir.
In there, did you become aware of additional threats that Mr. Blandino was making, including related to federal?
Object to the characterization of these as threats.
Did you become aware of additional threats that Mr. Blandino was making?
In the email?
In the letter itself that was attached,
Yes, sir.
including discussions about particularly filing a criminal complaint with the FBI,
Yes, sir.
specifically for a Title 18 USC 242 misdemeanor charge.
Yes, sir.
And are you familiar with that crime?
It's not written correctly in this document, but yes, I am familiar with that statute.
And what is it?
So it's 18 USC 242. It's a statute related to the deprivation of rights under color of law.
And does that carry with it misdemeanor punishments under federal law?
So it does carry misdemeanor punishments, and then depending on the level of deprivation of rights, if there's injury, it can occur felony status up to and including death penalty.
Okay. And I'm going to show you here on the front page of that document, it says here 18 USC section 242.
Yes, sir.
That's the crime
I
itself.
believe it to be the same statute he's referencing.
Okay. In addition to that, do you also see additional threats to send documents to the managing board of Mr. Federico's law firm
Yes, sir.
with a date, a drop dead date that was set by Mr. Blandino of May 5th or April 15th, 2000, I'm sorry, May 15th, 2019, is
Yes,
that right?
sir.
And then, did you become aware of a subsequent email that was sent by Mr. Federico, or sorry, by Mr. Blandino to Mr. Federico and all the managing board of Mr. Federico's law firm?
Yes, sir.
I have here, State's Exhibit 8. The email of May 16, 2019 from Kim Blandino to Jim Olson, Walt Kane, and John Gormley, Peter Angulo, Mike Staberski, and Michael Federico. Is that what you were familiar with?
Yes, sir.
And then the attachment there too?
Yes, sir.
And the attachments that Mr. Federico had attached, or that Mr. Blandino had attached for Mr. Federico's firm included everything that he had sent to Mr. Federico thus far.
Previous documents as well, yes.
Within the following days, did you secure a warrant for Mr. Blandino's arrest?
We did.
And was that in fact effectuated?
Yes, Mr. Blandino was arrested on May 21st.
Okay, 2019.
Yes, sir.
In the coming days, did you and your team also get authorization for a search warrant for Mr. Blandino's residence?
Yes, sir. We applied and received authorization to search on May 29th, 2019.
And that particular address, is that one that was associated with Mr. Blandino?
Yes, sir.
And it was listed by Mr. Blandino in nearly every document, if not every document, as his address.
Yes, sir.
Upon arriving at that residence, were you able to identify a specific location where Mr. Blandino was living?
Yes, sir.
And was it a room inside that residence?
It was a bedroom inside the residence, yes.
Okay. Now, the search warrant that you got for that residence, was that in fact authorized by a judge?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you here, State's Exhibit 9. You recognize what we're looking at here?
Yes, sir. That's the exterior view of the home from the street.
That is Mr. Blandino's home street.
Yes, sir.
Is that here in Clark County, Nevada?
Yes, sir.
I'll show you Grand Jury Exhibit 10. What are we seeing there?
That is the, looking into the bedroom, the kind of the entrance at the door. your first view going into his bedroom.
Into Mr. Blandino's bedroom?
Yes, sir.
All right. State's Exhibit 11, what are we seeing there?
So that would be a picture while you're inside the room, back looking out towards that entrance door.
State's Exhibit 12, what are we seeing there?
There was a filing cabinet that was directly to the left upon entering the room that had, obviously, a lot of documents in it.
Okay. State's Exhibit 13,
Same picture, just a different view of that filing area.
showing the top area of it.
Yes, sir.
State's Exhibit 14,
So that would be, as you enter the room, looking towards the back of the room, with the bed on the left there, and then obviously the closet in view, and then more paperwork and computer stuff there on the right.
that filing shelf that we just saw in the last two exhibits, would that be to your left in this photograph?
Yes, sir, just to the left visually.
Okay. State's Exhibit 15,
It's facing that closet, and then with the upper storage areas open in that bedroom.
State's Exhibit 16,
Same area, just more specific to that one particular storage cabinet.
are we seeing a computer up here at the top?
Yes, sir.
And among the items that you were authorized by the court to seize were computers and hard drives,
Yes, sir.
showing you State's Exhibit 17, what are we seeing here?
That's, again, in the room, I guess categorized as his desk area or his work area. You know, obviously numerous computers and computer monitors.
Okay. This particular computer here, was this hooked up to the monitors?
Yes, sir, that appeared to be the main computer that was attached, it was being worked with.
And ultimately, was that computer impounded?
It was seized and impounded.
And we'll talk a little bit about that more in a second. That particular computer itself, just to be clear, was impounded as package 2, item 4, is that right?
Yes, sir, it's an HP tower, model XW8400.
Okay. State's Exhibit 18, what is that?
It's a close-up view of the right side of that desk area from the previous photo.
Exhibit 19,
It'd be more of the left side of that desk area, a close-up view.
20,
It would be the underside of that desk area with that previously mentioned HP tower there on the left.
okay, and State's Exhibit 21,
Would be the one of the towers that was received, specifically that HP XW8400 model.
there were 3 computer towers that were seized from Mr. Blandino's bedroom, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Later on, all of those particular computers were included with another item that we'll discuss in another search warrant that was authored by your team and authorized by a judge, is that right?
Yes, sir. So pursuant to the seizure of these documents, then we applied for a subsequent search warrant on July 22nd with our digital forensics labs to actually process the data from those computers.
So that's a warrant to actually go into the computers digitally and retrieve whatever data is on them.
Yes, sir.
And this particular computer that was hooked up at the time, was that the main item that was found to have any relevant evidence on it?
That's what I was informed, yes.
Okay. In addition to the computer, were you also authorized to see certain documents within the residence?
Yes, sir.
Showing you here, State's Exhibit 22, what is this?
It was a manila type folder that had documents related to Mr. Federico.
And what is it titled in the front?
Federico case.
Okay. Showing you State's Exhibit 23, what do we see there?
It's a copy of that settlement agreement that we had previously seen in emails from Mr. Blandino.
Okay. And 24,
Same thing, just a more clear version.
all right. 25, what is this?
It appeared to be a handwritten note. You can maybe, it clearly has Mr. Federico's email address there on the bottom, and then I can read it if you want.
Yeah, please read.
It says, "All I care about is what does it take to get you out of my hair." And then Mr. Federico's email address there on the bottom, and then some names which I'm familiar with, used to be associated to the Las Vegas Municipal Court system.
Okay. All I care about is what it takes to get you out of my hair. Do those words seem to be consistent with words that you heard during the call between Mr. Federico and Mr. Blandino on April 29, 2019?
Yes, sir.
And did Mr. Federico provide Mr. Blandino his work email address during that same call?
You did.
State's Exhibit 26. What do we see there?
Another file that entitled Judge Screw-Ups with further documents inside.
State's Exhibit 27.
An unclaimed property folder.
Okay, and then within that folder, was there an item, State's Exhibit 28?
Yes, sir.
And this particular item was a document for unclaimed property under the name Kim Blandino,
Yes, sir.
listing the address of Street, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89101,
Yes, sir.
as well as listing the email of Kim at earthlink.net,
Yes, sir.
and phone number of 702.
Yes, sir.
That email address, phone number, and address for Mr. Blandino, were those consistent with what you had found on the documents that Mr. Blandino provided to Mr. Federico?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to determine if anybody else lived in that residence?
Yes, sir.
Who, if anybody, were you able to determine lived in that residence?
There was an elderly female in there. Her name is Evelyn or Evie Pendergrass, I believe her last name is.
Okay. Were you able to determine a relationship between her and Mr. Blandino?
Vaguely, yes.
As what?
So they appeared to be obviously roommates, but it appeared that Mr. Blandino was acting as her caretaker.
Okay. And how old is she?
I'm not sure how old she is now, but I would say that she's probably early to mid-90s.
Okay. Do you know what her relationship with the home was?
It's my understanding that she owned the home, sold it, and then rented it back from whoever the purchasers were to allow her to stay in the residence.
Okay. And were you able to determine through your investigation whether Mr. Blandino was paying rent at that home?
I don't believe he was. I think it was more kind of an exchange for services with taking care of Evie and allowing him to stay there.
Now, you became aware of additional aspects of Mr. Blandino's involvement with the traffic case that really started this whole interaction with Mr. Federico, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And did you become aware that, in fact, after that traffic case, he had filed an appeal,
Yes, sir.
and then ultimately that appeal was dismissed?
My understanding was in March 2019, that appeal was dismissed based on August 2018
Okay.
case.
I have State's Exhibit 29 here, certified copy of an order granting respondents' counter motion to dismiss appeal and remand matter to lower court Are you familiar with this document?
I have seen that, yes.
Is this the document that is ordering the dismissal of Mr. Blandino's appeal of his misdemeanor traffic trial that was held in front of Mr. Federico?
Yes,
Sorry,
sir.
Federico.
It appears to be yes.
Okay. And that was filed by the court on March 7th, 2019,
Yes, sir.
just about a month before Mr. Blandino goes to Mr. Federico's office for the
A
first
month
time.
and a day, yes.
And then State's Exhibit 30, is this from the same case?
If you can go back, sir, just so I can, with the case number.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, it appears to be the same case.
And this is just filed a few days later on March 11, 2019.
Yes, sir.
It's simply the notice of entry of order of the last order that we saw at State's Exhibit 29.
Yes, sir, further dismissing the case.
Okay. State will pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, detective, right?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Detective. And, you, you testified earlier on direct examination that, you were present on the phone call of April 29th from Mr. Federico to Mr. Blandino.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was initiated at your request?
Yes, that was initiated at our request through.
I guess it's over you and, Marshal Marwytz?
Yes, sir.
When you say our?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And, you didn't announce to Mr. Blandino that you were listening in on the phone call, did you?
I did not.
Okay. So, so there's no, disclosure to Mr. Blandino, you were passing notes to Mr. Federico at all during this phone call?
No, sir.
Okay. So Mr. Blandino wouldn't have had any way of knowing that law enforcement had originated this phone call, correct?
No, sir.
And, you indicate you did take notes of the call?
I did, sir.
Okay. And, did you pass notes, sorry, so you took notes, but you also passed notes to Mr. Federico?
Yes, sir.
And those notes were to tell Mr. Federico what to say or what to ask?
To ask him specifics, yes.
Okay. And, we've heard, let's see, what did you, I believe you said that, it was your impression that he was, caught off guard? That's what you said on,
Yes, sir.
that was his, and he was surprised, I believe is what you said.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I believe we've heard other testimony that described Mr. Blandino as giddy. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
No.
assessment? Okay. And you had, in passing notes, or I'm sorry, you stated on direct examination, you told Mr. Federico, do not suggest anything to him?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But Mr. Federico did say, do you want me to take away the contempt?
Yes,
Do
sir.
you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so he was sort of, what, I guess, how would you describe that? He was probing to see if you wanted him to do something in, about this case?
I can't speculate what his thought process was.
Or weren't you telling him what to say?
I was, but not specific to that statement.
Okay. And in the phone call, did Mr., as you recall, did Mr. Blandino just want to sit down and talk to Mr. Federico?
It sounded like he did prefer an in-person meeting, yes.
Okay. And in fact, he mentioned it multiple times. Do you recall that?
I don't remember multiple times, but I know that he was fairly insistent on wanting to sit down with Federico in person.
Okay. And, I mean, it's not illegal to sit down and meet with someone,
No, sir?
correct? Especially at this point, the case is over, as we just saw on direct examination, correct?
Yes, sir.
When the appeal had ended, the case was over, so it's not illegal or improper to just sit and talk. For Mr. Blandino to sit and talk with Mr. Federico.
Well, the properness of it I can't speak to, but it is not illegal.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. And so getting back to Mr. Blandino wanting to meet in person, but I believe it was that you wanted something in writing, is that
Yes,
correct?
sir.
You and Marshal Marwytz. So that thought of a writing originated with you or with your team?
Well, I know investigatively that I'm gonna need some sort of paper trail or evidence to be able to prove any crime that I attempt to charge. So I need to be able to document that, so an email or writing would provide me that documentation and evidence necessary.
So in order to effectuate an arrest, you need him to, I guess, say something. I mean, it wouldn't be good enough just for him to suggest something on the phone?
It could be, but obviously it strengthens the case if I have written documentation and evidence I can produce in court.
Okay. But that idea then did originate with you, to get something in writing? Or telling Mr. Federico to push for something in writing?
That was my goal, yes.
Okay. And at that time, Mr. Blandino, I mean, is it fair to say that he had no idea what he wanted?
Call
No,
it speculation, Your Honor.
Can you answer that?
I can answer to the context of what he mentioned on the phone call.
Yes, please.
So he did state specifically that he wanted some sort of open apology and again, an open forum. And then again advised Mr. Federico that he wanted to have some time to think it over and would send him a future settlement.
Okay. It's fair to say he didn't have anything at the ready that I want, like a laundry list, this, and this.
It didn't sound like that, no.
Okay. And, I mean, negotiate a settlement is sort of is a legal term of art that we use, correct?
I'm not an attorney, but it sounds,
But you got law enforcement
Lawyerish.
training.
yes, sir,
Okay. And you knew Mr. Blandino was not an attorney, correct?
yes.
All right. I mean, did you entertain the idea that maybe he didn't know what he was talking about?
I couldn't really speculate on that because I didn't know what the terms of the settlement might be. So I was withholding judgment until I saw what was produced by Mr. Blandino.
So you want him to produce something in order sort of to set him up, or what's?
No, I wouldn't categorize it as setting him up because I don't know what those terms look like. So
Mhm.
it could have been anything. I wasn't letting that settlement dictate the case. I was just gonna see what the settlement terms were and go from there.
And he sent those on May 2nd,
I
correct?
believe so, yeah.
Mhm. And why didn't you arrest him after the letter on May 2nd?
Because it just takes time. I have to build a case. I have to do my paperwork and documentations and coordinate charging documents.
Okay. And same thing as for the letter on May 3rd with the attachments. After that point, you didn't arrest him or seek an arrest warrant, did you?
I did not.
Okay. And why not?
Again, these things take time, and this is not the only case that I'm actually working, so I have to balance the cases based on the, violent crimes are gonna take precedence over other crimes, so I have to make judgments based on my caseload.
Okay. And you had indicated the May 3rd email provided far more clarity, correct? You testified to that on direct examination?
Yes.
Okay. But there was really nothing actionable at that point?
I wouldn't say there's,
Calls
Action, sorry.
calls for improper legal conclusion, Your Honor.
Yeah, why don't you clarify?
This is one more clarity, but there was nothing that you could use to seek an arrest warrant at that.
I wouldn't categorize it as that now.
Okay. Now, on May 9th, Mr. Federico, emailed, Mr. Blandino seeking what he called a global resolution.
Yeah.
That's all sitting in that
Yes, sir.
email?
Yes, sir.
Okay, was that at your insistence?
No,
Was, so Mr. Federico did that on his own?
I believe so.
Okay, so you had no involvement in that?
I don't recall directing Mr. Federico to email him on May 9th.
Okay, so you only told him what to say on the April 29th phone call?
Yes, it was more of a passive investigation, you know, seeing what came about, these communications with with them.
Okay. And, obviously, we heard your testimony eventually. The, Mr. Blandino was arrested and, you got a search warrant to search his house?
Yes, sir.
And that was on May 29th, you said?
He was arrested on May 21st, and the search warrant was served on May 29th.
Right. And, we saw the photos of that search warrant, but there was nothing that led to, further charges. Is that correct?
No, sir.
So there was nothing, you didn't find any threats of physical violence or anything that would lead to additional charges?
No, sir.
Or, no, there's no physical threats of violence, I guess, against any person, any public official?
I don't recall that now.
Okay. Had there been, that's something you probably would have, sought an arrest warrant for?
No, I would have begun a subsequent investigation, a parallel investigation into that. And then if there, you know, were elements to that crime and I had probable cause, then yes, I would have arrested for that.
Okay, but that did not, you didn't find anything in that?
I did not, sir.
Okay. I'll pass the witness.
Thank you. If Mr. Blandino had contacted Mr. Federico and said, hey, I just want an apology, it doesn't matter, you know, what you do, I'm gonna file a complaint regardless. You wouldn't be here testifying today, would you?
No, sir, because that would not be illegal.
If Mr. Blandino had never gone to Mr. Federico's office on April 8, 2019, dropped off that note, and then gone to his courtroom on April 25th, and then gone to his office on April 25th and dropped off another letter, would you ever have been sitting in that conference room on April 29, 2019 during that call?
I don't believe so.
Now, you indicated that Mr. Blandino said during the call that he wanted an apology in an open forum.
Yes, sir.
Did he indicate that that was what he wanted at minimum?
I believe so, yes.
And he didn't leave it at that, did he?
No, because he did mention a subsequent email to, you know, think of things that he wanted to include in a potential settlement.
So it was clear through that call that Mr. Blandino wanted more than that.
My impression was that there was going to be additional terms of the settlement that would be forthcoming in an email.
And in fact, there were.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, during that call, either you or Marshal Marwytz or Mr. Federico suggested paying Mr. Blandino $25,
No, sir.
suggested paying $500 to the Clark County Law Library,
No, sir.
suggested Mr. Federico go up to Reno for several days in October and take a class,
No, sir.
or that Mr. Federico do anything else consistent with what had been laid out in that document that Mr. Blandino termed as settlement agreement or release.
No, sir.
And in addition to that, regarding the April 9th email exchange, you already indicated that you weren't aware whether Marshal Marwytz had contact with Mr. Federico during that.
The April 9th or May 9th?
I'm sorry, May 9th.
May 9th. I can't recall if he had communications with Mr. Federico on that.
Okay. You also indicated that you had to prioritize this case with the multiple other cases that you were working at the time.
Yes, sir.
Among the things that you were working at the time, part of your investigative duties include terrorism, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And any sort of threats of international or domestic terrorism against Nevada and Clark County, Nevada to be specific.
And the United States, yes, sir.
And so I imagine that there's quite a bit of cases cases that come in that you have to follow leads up on?
There can be, yes.
And during the time of this case, do you recall whether you had multiple different cases that you were working?
I always generally carry, probably a
Yeah,
five.
I don't understand the relevance.
Door was opened by
Right.
defense.
Overall,
Thank
you
you.
proceed.
I generally carry probably between 5 and 10 federal cases, and then, a handful of state cases as well at any one time.
Okay.
Any prompts?
That's the witness.
Just briefly, Mr. Blandino subsequently sent the email on May 2nd with more terms because that's what you had asked for.
I did not ask for that.
Sorry, you, Mr. Federico, through your, I guess through you through Mr. Federico, better said, asked him for more terms.
I wouldn't categorize it as no.
You asked him for, he just wanted to, I mean, we heard testimony, Mr. Blandino just wanted to sit down and talk with Mr. Federico, correct?
On that initial phone call, yes.
Yes. And he sent the subsequent email at the assistance of Mr. Federico, correct?
I wouldn't say that either.
You, or Mr. Federico, through the notes and the questions that you were asking, asked him, well, what do you want?
Yes, but I also can't force Mr. Blandino to send an email, so that's Mr. Blandino's free choice on what email he chooses to send.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay.
Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you.
You may step down or excuse from your subpoena.
Can we take a 5-minute recess to get some things in line, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, we're gonna take a recess. During this recess, you're admonished not to discuss or communicate anyone, including fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case or its merits, either by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or other means of communication or social media, or read, watch, or listen to any news or media accounts or commentary about the case, do any research, such as consulting dictionaries, using the internet, or using reference materials, making the investigation, test the theory of the case, recreating the aspect of the case, or in any other way investigate or learn about the case on your own or form or express any opinion regarding the case until it's finally submitted to you. We'll be in recess. Officer Hoss will let you know when we're ready.
Thank you. All rise for acting jury, please. Juror,
Get the sentence that when you get executed.
please come to order. Court is now back in session. Yes, ma'am. All rise for entering jury, please.
State stipulate to the presence of the panel
We do, Your Honor.
and the defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you call your next witness?
State called Zachary Johnson.
Remain standing, raise your right hand, face forward.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
My name is Zachary Johnson, Zachary Johnsson.
Thank you. Where do you work, sir?
I'm employed at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
In what capacity?
I'm a supervisor in the Digital Forensics Lab,
How long have you worked in the forensics lab?
approximately 9.5 years.
And what do you do there?
Currently, I supervise a team of detectives,
And how long have you been with Metro?
approximately 17 years.
And how long, and what is your educational background that allows you to be supervisor of the digital forensic lab?
I have over 300 hours of police training, of which over 1,300 of those hours are specific in the field of digital forensics. I also have a master's degree in cybersecurity from Wilmington University, and I have a multitude of certifications from different vendors and organizations.
And as part of your position, do you do continuing education in the field of digital forensics?
Yes, ma'am.
What type of continuing education or training do you receive?
The certifications that we hold are only good for a certain number of years, at which time you have to have a certain number of continuing professional education credits, and there's typically examinations that go along with those, so I'm current on those.
And do you, as part of your job duties, do you recover evidence from digital items?
Yes, ma'am.
And drawing your attention to July of 2019, were you made aware of an individual named Blandino?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you familiar with a case that was initiated against Blandino?
Yes, ma'am.
What made you aware of that case?
A request came into the digital forensics lab to examine a certain number of digital devices for evidence in a crime.
And did you review a search warrant that allowed for the examination of these digital items?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that a search warrant that was authored by Marwytz?
Yes, ma'am.
And was it pertaining to an event number being 1904-000-41871?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do in relation to the items that were recovered during the search warrant?
The items that were recovered were located at the LVMPD evidence vault. We go down to the evidence vault, we retrieve those items and bring them back to the lab.
And when you retrieve them, do they have a package number and an item number on them?
Yes, ma'am.
And what evidence did you recover?
The first item that was asked to be examined was a hard drive, package 1, item 1. And then there were 3 HP desktop computers that were asked to be examined.
And just to clarify, this search warrant that you reviewed, did it have specific limitations as to what you could examine and review within the items that were recovered?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall what those parameters were for that search warrant?
The parameters were in relationship to a Judge Federico and a Judge Nordstrom, and certain events that took place regarding Kim Blandino's correspondence with them.
And so did you limit your search of these items? Did you limit the search of the hard drives to these specific items?
Yes, ma'am.
So you spoke of a hard drive that was recovered. Was that a Seagate hard drive?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you mentioned 3 towers that you also retrieved from the evidence vault.
Yes, desktop computers.
And can you distinguish what the hard drive is in relation to the desktop computers? Are they 2 different things?
Typically, yes. The desktop computer will contain a hard drive, most likely.
Okay. And these computers, these desktop computers you recovered, did they contain hard drives as well?
Yes, ma'am.
So going to package 2, item 4, was that a HP workstation?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall whether it contained hard drives?
Yes, ma'am.
What type of hard drives did it contain?
It contained 2 hard drives. There was a hard drive called a Hyundai hard drive, and one that we titled a burst hard drive.
And were they both connected to the workstation?
No, ma'am.
Do you recall which one was connected?
I'd have to refer to my report to see which one was connected.
And just moving on just to the next packages, did you also recover workstations that were under packages 3 and 4?
Yes, ma'am.
Were those both HP workstations as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you also review the hard drives within those workstations?
Yes, ma'am.
Were there any items of relevance within those last 2 items?
Not within my search terms that I used.
However, were you able to recover specific items of evidence in the package 2, item 4 HP workstation?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And just to clarify, that you mentioned that would be the hard drive Patriot Burst and the hard drive Hyundai, is that correct?
Yes.
And just showing you what's been marked as it's exhibit 21. Does that appear to be one of the hard drives you reviewed and that you retrieved from the evidence vault?
It appears to be one of the towers, the desktop computers, yes.
And you mentioned that in one of the towers, there was a hard drive that was connected and one that was disconnected?
Yes, ma'am.
And you reviewed both of those hard drives, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
One of them would have been the burst hard drive and one of them would have been the Patriot hard drive?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you run us through what you do when you conduct a forensic examination on hard drives?
First thing that we do is we photograph the evidence in the state that we get it into the lab. The next step that we do is we remove those hard drives and we connect them to a device called a write blocker. This write blocker prevents our forensic machines from making any changes to that hard drive. We then make a copy of that hard drive and we use that copy as a working copy to do our examination on.
And so when you do, you mentioned the first step was taking photographs and then you did an imaging of the hard drives through that write blocker
Yes, ma'am.
program. So would that just basically be just copying everything on the hard drive onto a separate program so you can review it?
Yes, ma'am.
After you received that, did you process those images?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you process them through a specific tool that you used?
Yes, we use magnet axiom.
And can you tell the members of jury what magnet axiom is?
Magnet is a suite of tools, one of them being Axiom, that processes what we call images. Images is basically the copy of that hard drive that we made. They process that image and they present the items recovered on that hard drive in a format that is easily searched and understandable by investigators as well as court personnel.
And how long have you used magnet axiom?
Approximately 7 years.
And do you stay updated with any changes in that program?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you conducted this examination with magnet axiom, does it provide you a way of better viewing what is on those hard drives,
Yes, ma'am.
essentially?
Yes.
And does it also allow you to review metadata?
Yes, ma'am.
What is metadata?
Metadata is data about data. You can consider it like the tag on the back of your shirt that tells you the size, where it was made, how to wash it. It doesn't matter where you take your shirt, that data stays with that shirt unless you physically remove the tag.
And you mentioned that you needed to review your report to recall which hard drive was connected.
Yes, ma'am.
And if I were to show you a copy of your report without refresh your recollection,
Yes, ma'am.
I will show you digitally a copy of your forensic examination report, which has already been shown to the defense counsel. If I may approach? Thank you. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, ma'am.
Which hard drive was connected to the workstation at the time it was recovered?
The burst hard drive was connected to the computer at the time of examination.
And showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 36, if I can get technology to work.
This is not admitted.
Not yet, it's just the initial page for purposes of identification.
Perfect.
Thank you. Does this appear to be, well, what does this appear to be?
Appears to be a file that I created for you for purposes.
Okay, and is that the examination of the burst hard drive with the specific items in question we were discussing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And does this appear to be the copy you provided to the state?
Yeah, it has the same name as I gave you.
Okay, and just for the record, that name being P2_14 or I4_ burst. And what do those first 4 letters and numbers mean?
P is for package, 2 is the package number, I is the item number, or I is for item, and 4 is the item number itself. So package 2, item 4, and then a descriptor of the number, which device it is.
And in this situation, it is the burst hard drive?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I move for admission of State's proposed Exhibit 36.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Thank you. And opening it up, is this the tool you mentioned, the magnet axiom tool?
Yes, ma'am?
And does this allow you to review those specific items in a legible format?
Yes, ma'am?
And were you able to review all these items?
Yes, ma'am?
So during the course of the examination, starting with the first item, which is $RB 09883, what type of document is that?
That is a PDF document.
Okay, and is this part on the right the preview of what that document is?
Yes, ma'am?
Right. And going to that preview, can you read what the date at the top of that document is?
May 16th, 2019.
And is the subject line to Olson, Cannon, Gormley, Angulo, and Seversky, and CC to Michael Federico?
Yes, ma'am?
And is the person sending, well, does it then say from Tim Blandino on the third line?
Yes, ma'am?
And does the fourth line indicate follow-up to letter of May 9, 2019, requesting settlement with Michael Federico?
Yes, ma'am?
All right. And then you mentioned that you also have metadata that is provided with this tool, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am?
Does this appear right here, this details section on the bottom right of the screen? Does that appear to be metadata?
Yes, that's a type of metadata.
Oh, metadata, thank you. And what type of metadata do we have on this specific item?
For this one, you have the size of it, the file name, and created, accessed, and modified times.
Okay. And going to those created, accessed, and modified times, when does it appear to have last been modified?
It indicates that the last modified time would be 5/16/2019 at 11 a.m. with 35 seconds.
Okay. And just to kind of explain to the members of the jury what these times and dates are, does the metadata address every time the document is accessed?
Depends on which times you're referring to. Your lines that say file system, created, accessed, and modified times, so the third, fourth, and fifth lines, that's metadata that's created by your operating system on your computer, like Windows. Ones that do not say file system, like the one on the second line that says last modified date and time, maybe a time that was stored with the file itself. So they can have varying times based off of actions of the person who was manipulating the item.
And just to clarify, any of the
Sorry. What, that last, at what point was he referring to? Can you clarify that?
Sure. You mentioned the last modified time. Would that be the second line that we have under file name?
Yeah, you have file name, which is the $RB09883.pdf. Then you have the next line, which is last modified date and time. That does not indicate that it's a file system time, so that would be indicative of a time that is housed with the document itself. And then you have the next three lines that start with file system. So file system created date and time, file system last access date and time, file system last modified date and time. Those are indicate that they're from the file system, which would be the Windows operating system.
Okay. And just to be clear, when we're talking about this modification, access, etc., does that refer to anything the Metro has accessed or modified?
No, we have not adjusted any of these times or done anything to adjust those times.
So is this essentially what you recovered from the hard drives, which is from I'm sorry, let me rephrase. Do these dates and times refer to the last time these items were modified or accessed by the user prior to Metro taking them into impound?
They are indicative of that.
All right, so fair to
That's a complicated question.
No, of course, that's on me. essentially, once the hard drives were taken by Metro, there have been no changes to, or access of any of these documents, correct?
That is correct.
Right. So what we see here is not reflective of anything that happened after Metro took over, or took control of these items.
That is correct.
And so you mentioned that the file system last modified date and time was May 16, 2019 at 11:00:35 a.m.
Yes.
Going to the next item, do you call it an item or an artifact?
We call them artifacts in the lab.
Okay, are they essentially just items of,
Yes, ma'am.
so going to the next item, Federico letter of May 9th, .pdf. Would that be a PDF format?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and going to the preview, what date do you have on that first line?
May 8th, 2019.
Okay, and who is the document to?
It indicates to Michael Federico in his capacity as judge pro tempore.
And then is it also from Kim Blandino?
It indicates yes from
Okay.
Blandino.
And is the fourth line read follow-up to proposed settlement offer sent May 2nd and 3rd?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And just all these names that we have on the left under evidence, so in the middle of the screen, is that how those items or artifacts were saved by the user prior to Metro taking control of them?
The ones with, that you're highlighted, yes. The $sign one, no, that is from a recycle bin. So your first one, no, that's not how the user saved it, that's how the computer saved it when he deleted it, or when that person deleted it.
So does the $sign and RB mean essentially RB for recycle bin?
Yes, ma'am.
But anything under that, would those be how the user saved those items into the hard drive?
Down to a settlement offer to Michael Federico.
Okay,
The last three are not items that would have been saved by the operator of the computer. That is just computer stuff that the computer does.
and going to the metadata on this item, Federico letter of May 9th, can you tell the jury what the metadata shows?
For this one, the file name would be Federico letter of May 9th.pdf. It has a file system last modified date and time of 5/15/2019 at 4 hours, 53 minutes, and 56 seconds PM.
And that would also be the, would that also be the last modified date? 5/15/2019 at 4:53?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you explain what that, how that might occur?
The last modified time was 5/15.
Correct. And would that be, could that be because it is a PDF?
Could you rephrase your question?
So last modified, could that be the last time the document was saved?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So with that, and you mentioned that was 5/15/2019 and 4:53 PM.
Yes, ma'am.
Showing you the next artifact, Federico letter of May 9th. Is that essentially the same artifacts or letter that you just looked at?
The first lines appear to be the same, yes.
Okay, so it would also be the May 8th, 2019 letter with the subject line being follow-up to proposed settlement offer sent May 2 and 3?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And going to the metadata, is the metadata here, does it show a different date and time as
Yes.
the prior artifact?
Yes, ma'am.
And does the artifact in question seem to have been file system last modified date, May 9th, 2019 at 10:46 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and again, that could have been the last time it was saved, the last time it was downloaded.
There's a multitude of reasons it could change.
Okay. Showing you the next artifact, letter to firm of May 16th. Is this also a PDF document?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And does it appear to be dated on May 16th, 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
Does this appear to be substantially the same artifact as the one that was previously in the recycle bin?
I have reviewed both of them.
Does it appear to have the same date and destination as the recycle bin letter, which I just opened?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so back to letter to firm of May 16th, .pdf. Is that the May 16th, 2019 letter to Olson, Cannon, Gormley, and Gulen, Sobersky, and CC to Michael Federico?
Yes, ma'am.
Going to that metadata, does it appear the file system last modified time was May 16, 2019 at 11:12 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
Next artifact, Federico proposed settlement.pdf. Does this appear to be titled settlement agreement and release?
Yes, ma'am.
And going to the metadata, does this appear to have been file system created May 2nd, 2019 at 8 p.m. File system last modified date time at May 2nd, 2019 at 8 p.m. as well?
Yeah, it's the last modified 8 p.m., yeah.
Okay, so again, that could have been the last time it was downloaded or the last time it was opened.
Yes, ma'am.
Next artifact, proposed settlement with exhibits.pdf. Does that appear to be the same title, settlement agreement and release?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see the number of pages on this document?
Yes, ma'am.
How many pages does this document appear to have?
29.
And going to the metadata, does this file seem to have last been modified in the file system on May 3rd, 2019 at 3:11 p.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
Going to the letter to Michael Federico about ncjd.odt. Could you tell the members of the jury what ODT stands for?
ODT is an open office document format. It's from Libra Office program. It's basically the free version of Microsoft Word.
And so would that be an open source program
Yes, ma'am.
as opposed to something that may have a paywall?
Yes, ma'am.
So looking at the preview here, does this appear to be a letter dated April 25th, 2019 to Michael Federico in his capacity as Judge Pro Tempore?
Yes, ma'am.
And does the subject line include desire not to have to file a formal complaint with Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline, parenthesis, in quotes, NCJD?
Yes, ma'am.
And going to the metadata, does it appear to have been file system last access date of April 25th, 2019 at 3:31 p.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? And just going to this created date and time, which appears to be March of 2014, could you explain how that might be?
So that would, those are not the file system times, that would be the document time. So that would potentially be something when the document was created by, LibreOffice or one of those programs, something that's carried over when you open up a new document.
So does that mean that essentially if I were to open a new Word document or a new Writer document and then take everything off of it and start writing on it again, that might have been why it was created prior to 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's no way of accessing any prior versions of these items, correct?
Only if they were saved in versions.
Okay, and in this situation, did you find any saved versions?
No, ma'am.
Next artifact, letter to Michael Federico, follow up May 8th.odt. Again, is that an open source writer program?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And does it appear to be essentially the same letter?
Yes, ma'am.
So the April 25th, 2019 letter?
Yes, ma'am.
Fair to say that there were some duplicative items that were under different names?
Yes, ma'am.
And again, on this one, the metadata on this case seemed to be last accessed on the file system May 8th, 2019 and 9:39 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Next artifact, letter to Michael Federico, follow up May 9th.odt. Does that appear to be a letter dated May 8th, 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
And does it include, again, that subject line of follow-up to proposed settlement offers that May 2 and 3?
Yeah.
So just to distinguish it from the PDF format, does this appear to be essentially that writer program you mentioned, kind of like a Word document,
Yes, ma'am.
as opposed to a PDF document?
ma'am.
What would the difference be between a PDF and a Word document?
PDF documents are widely accepted through a multitude of programs to open them. So you can open PDF in Chrome browser or Adobe Acrobat, or if you have like a Word document, you might not be able to. You have to open up in Microsoft Word or an open office program, for example.
And is PDF generally harder to modify if you receive one unless you have a specific program?
You would have to have the pay version of Adobe Acrobat. There's also some other programs that would modify them, but the PDFs allow you to have electronic signatures and password protection, things like that.
And in your training and experience, are PDFs widely accepted, again, due to these reasons?
Yes, ma'am.
And going to the next one, letter to Michael Federico, Partners, May 16th, .odt, does this again appear to be the Word document of that prior letter we saw?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the date on it?
May 16th, 2019.
Okay, and does this again appear to be to addressed to Olson County, Gormley, Gula, and Staberski, and CC to Michael Federico?
Yes, ma'am.
And I know that this is similar to the prior one, but again, this is the Word document as opposed to the PDF document we previously observed.
Yes, ma'am.
And does this appear to a file system last access date and time of May 15th, 2019 at 5 p.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
And then this last artifact, settlement offer to Michael Federico about NCJD. Does this appear to be the writer document of that PDF we previously saw that included the settlement agreement and release?
Yes, ma'am.
Fair to say that that is also why the formatting is different?
Yes.
And the creation date to this file system last access date? Well, actually, let me ask you this. The created date and time again seems to indicate March 12th, 2014, and you indicate that may be when the document was initially started, correct?
It's possible. It's, however, the freeware program has created those documents in the first place.
Okay, and you didn't find any prior versions to this document? Or
Not this one, no.
Did you?
No.
Okay. And so the file system last access date, does this appear to be April 30th, 2019 at 10:19 p.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
And all of these items, just going through the metadata, who does the author appear to be?
It indicates the author is Evelyn Pendergraft.
Okay. And that, is the author necessarily the user?
Not necessarily.
Okay, and going to this letter to Michael Federico Partners, May 16th at ODT, at the bottom of the preview, again, it shows the creator is Evelyn Pendergraft, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And who does the generate, what does the generator file path appear to be, at least the first part?
Blandino.
Okay. And what does that indicate to you?
That name is associated to this document in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. And again, these are the items that were recovered during the search warrant on Mr. Blandino's room and hard drives in July of 2019.
Yes, ma'am.
And showing you indulgence. So this is the burst hard drive that you previously mentioned, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And was this the one that was connected to the workstation?
Yes, ma'am.
And you also mentioned there was a Hyundai hard drive in that workstation,
Yes, ma'am.
and that one was disconnected?
Yes.
Do you recall what its location was in relation to the burst hard drive?
It was either above or below it.
Okay. And opening up what's been marked as state's proposed exhibit 35. Maybe. Okay. Does this appear to be the Hyundai HTML report you generated for the Hyundai hard drive?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Again, this is a document you generated for purposes of this investigation.
Yes, ma'am.
And going to report.html. Okay, so showing you this initial introduction essentially to this report, does this appear to be the report you pulled for this Hyundai hard drive?
For the court purposes, yes.
For court purposes? Okay, and it appears to be that specific report you provided to the state?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Your Honor, I move to admit state's proposed exhibit 35.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
And to explain to the members of the jury the difference between this view and the Magnum Axon view is, does it essentially contain the same information,
Yes, ma'am.
just in a different format?
Yes, ma'am.
And in this case, was there only one artifact that you were asked to review?
Yes, ma'am.
And where would I find that?
It's gonna be on the left-hand side under web related. You'll click on Chrome downloads.
Okay, maybe,
Maybe.
maybe not. Of course, very brief indulgence. All right, well, let's go to the title page first of all. Were you the examiner on this Hyundai Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and is that your name?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and is this a report you generated for purposes of court yesterday?
Yes, ma'am.
For this specific artifact in question?
Yes.
All right. Of course, indulgence. And may I perhaps ask our forensic experts to maybe try to work this,
Oh,
if
sure,
I may?
sure. You wanted to step down and see? if
Yes,
we
would
can-
you be able to sit down just so for purposes of getting this to work? I apologize,
I've got the same.
You may step down. You want him to come to your computer, right?
that would be wonderful
Okay.
if the court would so allow. Can we approach this, please? Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we're gonna take a recess. During this recess, you're not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, when you waive regarding the case or its merits, either by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or other means of communication or social media, or read, watch, or listen to any news or media accounts or commentary about the case, or do any research such as consulting dictionaries, using the internet, or using reference material, making an investigation, test a theory of the case, recreate any aspect of the case, or in any other way investigate or learn about the case or form or express any opinion regarding the case until it's finally submitted to you. Officer Hawks will let you know when we're ready to start.
Thank you all,
We're
rise
in
for the next
recess.
jury, please. Jurors?